Today, we're diving into the pretty dramatic story of how modern psychology was born. And really, it's the story of a fierce battle over what our thoughts, our feelings, and our actions even are.
So let's just kick things off with a huge question, one that gets right to the core of being human. Think about your decision to watch this right now. Was that a conscious choice you made, an act of free will, or was it just the result of a whole lifetime of conditioning you weren't even aware of? This very question, believe it or not, has been tearing psychology apart for over 100 years.
I mean, that's a pretty wild idea, right? It suggests that the little voice in your head, the one you think of as yourself, might not be entirely your own. It might just be a script that you've been taught by the world around you. And this conflict between our private inner world and our observable outward behavior is the central battle in the entire history of psychology.
Okay, so our story really gets going in the late 19th century. This is the moment when people first tried to drag the mind out of the fuzzy world of philosophy and stick it under a scientific microscope.
You gotta remember, before the 1870s, the mind was something philosophers just debated. But then, in just a few decades, a full-blown revolution kicks off, and it all starts in this small lab in Leipzig, Germany.
So this thing might look like a medieval instrument of some kind, but it's actually called a complication pendulum. Pioneers, like a guy named Wilhelm Wundt, used contraptions just like this to try and measure something that's totally invisible. They were actually trying to time the speed of a thought. For the very first time, scientists were attempting to quantify our internal world.
Wundt's whole approach was called structuralism. The idea was simple, but wow, was it ambitious. He thought, hey, if chemists can break down water into hydrogen and oxygen, why can't we break down consciousness into its basic building blocks? They used a technique called introspection, where they'd train people to report on every single sensation and feeling they had moment by moment.
But of course, no sooner does one big idea pop up than someone else comes along to challenge it. Over in America, William James had a totally different take. Functionalism. He wasn't interested in a static map of the mind's parts. He asked a much more practical question. What is consciousness for? How does it actually help us survive and get by in the world? So just as these early psychologists were debating the hows and whys of consciousness, this radical new movement just swept in and basically declared that studying the mind itself was totally unscientific and a complete waste of everybody's time.
And this right here, this is the core of it. John B. Watson pretty much just said, look, if I can't see it and I can't measure it, it doesn't belong in my science. Thoughts, feelings, consciousness, he threw it all out.
For the behaviorists, the mind was a black box, totally unknowable, and since you can't see what's going on inside, they argued we shouldn't even bother trying. All that mattered was what you could see. A stimulus goes in and a behavior comes out. That was it. That was the new focus of psychology.
And through really powerful concepts like operant conditioning, which was championed by B.F. Skinner, they showed how consequences shape almost everything we do. A rat learns to press a lever to get food, a kid learns to say please to get a cookie. To a behaviorist, it's all just a matter of reinforcement and punishment.
Now, for decades, this black box approach totally dominated psychology in America. I mean, it was clean, it was scientific, but eventually some pretty big cracks started to show up in its foundation. It just became obvious that something major was missing. I mean, how does a simple stimulus response model explain a child saying a sentence they've never ever heard before, or a scientist having that eureka moment in the lab? If you ignore the mind, you end up ignoring the very things that make us human.
So a new generation of psychologists, who were really inspired by things like the rise of computer science, they decided it was finally time. Time to pry open that black box and see what was really going on inside. And this was a landmark moment. In 1956, a paper by George Miller called The Magical Number 7 ± 2 was a total game changer. Just by measuring the limits of our short-term memory, he proved that you could study mental processes scientifically. All of a sudden, the mind wasn't off limits anymore.
This cognitive revolution didn't get rid of science, it built a better science. You had linguists like Noam Chomsky arguing that our ability to use language is just way too complex to be learned through simple conditioning. But the biggest thing? The computer. It gave them this powerful new metaphor. For the first time, scientists could talk about the mind as an information processor. Thinking became processing, memory became storage, attention became a filter. It gave them a whole new language to finally describe what was happening inside that black box.
Which of course brings us right back to where we started. Because now we can see how each of these big movements in psychology gives a completely different answer to our original question about choice.
Let's think about a super simple choice, like picking a coffee. A functionalist would say you're making a conscious decision to achieve a goal, like staying awake. A behaviorist would say, nope, it's just a habit. It's the action that's been rewarded the most in the past. And a cognitive psychologist would see it as this complex calculation your brain is running, processing all the inputs to predict the best possible outcome.
See, this battle for the mind isn't just some dusty old chapter in a textbook. It's still happening, not just in science labs, but inside each and every one of us, every single day. So, the next time you make a choice, any choice, just stop for a second and ask yourself, who's really in control here?